Consider for a moment all the trials that you faced up to this point in your lives. No one would sympathize with you more than the composer Ludwig van Beethoven. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to tell you about Beethoven's life, which was characterized by perpetual struggle and ultimate triumph. After reading the surveys you all filled out, I know that a majority of you are interested in learning about how this famous composer overcame adversity. I hope that my speech today can satisfy your curiosity and that Beethoven's story can serve as an inspiration in your own lives. So I'm credible to speak about this because I've spent many hours researching his life and have even received input from Dr. Keaton, the head of our own Department of Music here at FAU. Without further ado, I'm going to tell you about the struggle and triumph of Beethoven through two periods of his life, his childhood and his professional career. I'll start by discussing his childhood. On December 16, 1770, Beethoven was born in Bonn, Germany, into the less than loving arms of Johann von Beethoven, a mediocre musician who was better known for his drunkenness than his actual musical talent. According to Jan Swafford, author of the book Beethoven, Anguish and Triumph, Johann discovered his son's musical talent at the young age of 4. With the success of Mozart, the recent child prodigy fresh in society's mind, he attempted to manipulate his son's talent for personal gain. As a mean drunk, he tended to do this by quite literally beating the talent into his son. Imagine then, poor young Beethoven sitting at the family piano, fingers straining to reach the keys as he practices for hours on end with nothing but beatings in return. Not surprisingly, Beethoven grew up resenting his father, but somehow his love and talent for music remained intact. At the age of 12, he began performing his first concerts as an organist in the court. He also began writing his first compositions. At 16, he travels to Vienna and meets Mozart, the child prodigy now turned adult. In a recent lecture, Dr. Keaton said that when these two composers met, Beethoven performed an improvised piece so flawlessly that Mozart actually accused him of preparing it ahead of time. Hurt by this accusation, Beethoven then insisted on performing a piece of Mozart's choosing, which he did with similar magnificence and astounded even the prodigy himself. By 18, he was successful enough to become the primary moneymaker of his family. At this point, he sued his father for abuse and became the court-appointed head of his household, a rather just and satisfying turn of events in my opinion. So now that I've told you about Beethoven's childhood, I'm going to tell you about the adversities and triumphs of his professional career. Beethoven's career was an inspiring combination of struggle and victory. You might be surprised to learn that he wasn't a natural-born composer. His first drafts and even his second and third drafts were not usually anything impressive. It was only through agonizing hours of rewriting and revision that he produced one of his masterpieces. According to the book, Mystery of Music by Kenneth Keaton, Beethoven only wrote 57 works over 57 years. Compare this to the 626 catalog works of Mozart over only 35 years of life. Thus, we have significantly less of Beethoven's output, even though he lived 2 decades longer. Still, those works he did produce were utterly flawless. As Julian Boudin wrote in the Encyclopedia Britannica, Beethoven elevated the nature of music to its highest plane of art. He essentially brought it to perfection, and you just can't improve on perfection. Still, at the peak of his popularity in 1798, Beethoven began to lose his most prized possession as a composer, his hearing. Not surprisingly, this created some drastic social rifts for him. You see, in those days, society held the belief that physical disabilities were a form of karma, punishment for past sins and crimes. Thus, it was not uncommon for one with an infirmity like deafness to be shunned by society. For Beethoven, the universal brotherhood of man had always been an inspirational ideal very close to his heart. To be severed from that brotherhood by his own deafness nearly crushed him. In 1802, he wrote the Heiligenstadt Testament, describing his suffering and how he came to terms with it. An abbreviated version reads as follows: "O my fellow men, who describe me as unfriendly, peevish, and even misanthropic, how greatly you do wrong me. For you do not know the secret reason why I appear to you to be so. I cannot bring myself to say, speak up, shout, for I am deaf. I must live like an outcast. If I appear in company, I am overcome by a burning anxiety of letting people notice my condition. Such experiences drove me almost to despair, and I was on the point of putting an end to my life. The only thing that held me back was my art, for indeed it seemed impossible to leave this world before creating all I felt urged to compose." As we can see in this letter, Beethoven's life was full of struggle and emotional turmoil. Nevertheless, even isolated from society, he continued in his art. driven by that profound desire to manifest his emotions and beliefs through music. In 1824, he achieved just this with his greatest masterpiece, Symphony No. 9 in D minor. According to the website allaboutLudwig-van-Beethoven.com, this work was based on Friedrich Schiller's poem, Ode to Joy, and was inspired by that universal brotherhood of man, an ideal that, as we now know, had long impacted Beethoven. This piece was also a choral work, and it was the first time that voices had ever been integrated into a symphony. Thus, the performance of this was actually a rather groundbreaking event. As the crowds listened to the harmonious perfection of the choir intertwined with the symphony, they knew that they were in the presence of something truly historic, and went wild, frantically leaping and cheering. Poor deaf Beethoven, with his back to the audience as he conducted the performance, had no knowledge of the impact his music was having, until finally, at the very end, one of the vocalists turned him around to view a crowd reaction so grand that it brought tears of joy to his eyes. This moment could well be considered the pinnacle of Beethoven's career, and even his life. So today I told you about the struggle and triumph of Beethoven throughout his childhood and professional career. Through his own genius and sheer force of will, he was able to transcend an abusive father, a hostile society, and even deafness. Beethoven's music has been celebrated as the pinnacle of the Romantic period, an era characterized by themes of emotion and individualism, struggle, and triumph. Indeed, Beethoven's very life itself seems to be the embodiment of these themes. So given all of this, I hope that Beethoven's triumph in the face of such overwhelming adversity can serve as an inspiration in your own lives. Thank you.